I'm Melissa Lane, 33, and I worked my way up from a maintenance hangar kid to a Black Ops Air Force major. For years, I backed someone who didn't deserve the loyalty, covered for him, supported his rise, made his success possible. But the day he humiliated me in front of an entire operations floor, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been dismissed or disrespected by someone you carried for years? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before we get into what happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your dignity after being wronged, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, respect, and taking back your power. What happened next might not be what you expect. I grew up on Air Force bases. My father worked the flight line as an enlisted aircraft maintainer, hands permanently stained with hydraulic fluid and jet fuel. My mother was a civilian contractor who managed logistics for cargo operations. They met during a deployment cycle, married quickly, and built a life that moved every 3 years. I learned early that respect in the military wasn't inherited or assumed. It was earned through competence, consistency, and the ability to deliver when it mattered. I was 7 the first time I stood at the edge of a runway at dusk and watched A-10 Warthogs launch for a training mission. The sound hit my chest before it reached my ears. The smell of burnt kerosene hung in the air. I watched those aircraft lift off with a kind of brutal grace, and something inside me clicked into place. I wanted to fly. Not as a passenger or a dreamer, but as the person in the cockpit making the decisions that mattered. From that point forward, everything I did was deliberate. I studied obsessively. I didn't talk much in school, but I listened. I absorbed everything I could about aerodynamics, navigation, meteorology, and military structure. I ran every morning before class. I joined JROTC in high school and took it seriously when most of my peers treated it like an easy credit. I knew the path to a commission required discipline, and I built my life around that goal. I applied to the Air Force Academy and didn't get in. I wasn't crushed. I enrolled in a state university with an ROTC program and kept moving forward. I graduated with a degree in aerospace engineering and commissioned as a second lieutenant at 23. My first duty station was a training squadron in Texas, where the heat was relentless and the standards were higher than I expected. I didn't mind. I preferred environments where performance mattered more than personality. The instructors challenged me. They tested my decision-making under pressure, my ability to process multiple data streams simultaneously, and my capacity to stay calm when things went wrong. I passed every evaluation. I didn't just meet the standards. I exceeded them. My reputation grew quietly. I wasn't loud or political. I didn't network aggressively or try to stand out socially. I simply did the work, and the work spoke for itself. By my second year as a second lieutenant, I developed a skill set that set me apart. I had an unusual ability to recognize patterns in complex data and integrate information from multiple sources quickly. I could look at a tactical scenario, identify the critical variables, and build a coherent operational picture faster than most of my peers. It wasn't magic. It was repetition, focus, and an obsessive attention to detail. But it caught the attention of senior officers who were looking for candidates to feed into specialized programs. That's when I met Daniel Rourke. He was a senior captain at the time, maybe 6 months away from his promotion to major. He was articulate, polished, and politically savvy in a way I wasn't. He knew how to work a room. He understood the informal power structures that existed alongside the official chain of command. He was on a fast-track promotion path, and everyone knew it. We were assigned to the same planning cell during a joint exercise. He was the lead. I was support. The mission required integrating air and ground assets across a compressed timeline, and the planning package was a mess. Conflicting data, unclear priorities, and a command structure that kept changing the requirements. Rourke was struggling. He didn't say it outright, but I could see it in the way he kept revising the same sections without making progress. I stayed late one night and rewrote the entire operational summary. I restructured the timeline, reconciled the conflicting data, and built a clearer decision matrix for the leadership team. I didn't ask for credit. I just put the revised document on his desk the next morning with a note that said I'd cleaned up a few sections. He used it. He presented it as his own work. He didn't acknowledge my contribution. He didn't thank me. He just took it and moved forward. I told myself it didn't matter. I was junior. He was senior. That's how things worked. I wasn't doing the work for recognition. I was doing it because the mission required it, and I couldn't tolerate substandard planning. But it set a pattern. Over the next several months, I kept contributing. I'd stay late to finish his briefs. I'd catch errors in his analysis and fix them before they reached leadership. I'd take on tasks that weren't technically my responsibility because I knew they wouldn't get done otherwise. Rourke accepted everything I gave him without question and without reciprocity. He never asked if I needed help with my own workload. He never offered to support my projects. He simply took what I provided and treated it as expected. The imbalance grew slowly. At first, I justified it. He was senior. He had more responsibilities. He was managing relationships I couldn't see. But the justification started to feel hollow. I was doing his work in addition to my own, and he was taking the credit while I remained invisible. I earned my promotion to first lieutenant on schedule. My evaluation reports were strong. My operational record was clean. I was building a reputation as someone who could be trusted with complex assignments, and that reputation started opening doors. But Rourke's behavior didn't change. If anything, it intensified. The more capable I became, the more he relied on me, and the less he acknowledged what I was doing. I didn't confront him. I didn't complain. I kept my head down and kept working. I told myself that competence would be recognized eventually, that the system would reward the right people if I just stayed patient. But patience started to feel like complicity. Around that time, I was selected for a highly classified intelligence fusion course. It was a stepping stone into covert operations, a world where precision and discretion mattered more than visibility. The selection process was rigorous. Only a handful of officers from my year group were chosen. When I got the notification, I felt a quiet validation. Someone somewhere had noticed the work I was doing. Rourke's reaction was cold. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't ask about the program. He just looked at me across the planning cell one afternoon and said, "Must be nice to get pulled into the flashy assignments." There was an edge in his voice I hadn't heard before. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to resentment. He was threatened. My trajectory was starting to surpass his, and he didn't like it. From that point forward, the disrespect became overt. He started interrupting me in meetings. He'd dismiss my suggestions before I finished explaining them. He'd make condescending jokes about me being the analyst or the desk brain, always in a tone that sounded complimentary but wasn't. Other officers picked up on it. Some of them started treating me the same way, like I was support infrastructure rather than a peer. I kept working. I kept contributing. But I stopped expecting anything in return. I stopped expecting acknowledgement. I stopped expecting respect. I just focused on the work, on the missions, on the clearances and qualifications I was accumulating. I told myself that eventually, the system would correct itself. That confidence and credibility would speak louder than politics. I was wrong. My promotion to first lieutenant came with a new set of responsibilities. I was assigned to a strategic planning unit that supported multiple theater commands. The work was dense and unforgiving. Long hours, shifting priorities, and senior leadership that demanded precision without offering much guidance. I thrived in that environment. I liked the clarity of high-stakes planning. I liked knowing that the work I did had direct operational consequences. Rourke was promoted to major during this period. His rise continued on schedule, fueled by strong evaluation reports and strategic relationships with the right senior officers. He was good at managing perceptions. He knew how to position himself as indispensable without necessarily being the most competent person in the room. And he had a talent for taking credit for work that other people did. I watched it happen repeatedly. He'd assign tasks to junior officers, take their outputs, repackage them slightly, and present them as his own strategic insights. Most of the junior officers didn't push back. They were too inexperienced or too intimidated to challenge a major. And Rourke was careful. He never outright lied about authorship. He just framed things in a way that implied ownership. I wasn't immune to this pattern. If anything, I was his primary resource. I'd draft operational summaries, build scenario analyses, and compile intelligence briefs that he'd present to colonel-level leadership. He'd change a few words, adjust the formatting, and deliver them as his own products. I stopped correcting the record. It felt pointless. The work was getting done. The missions were moving forward. My name wasn't on the documents, but the quality of the output was visible to people who mattered. Or so I thought. The reality was more complicated. Rourke's reputation grew while mine remained static. Senior officers saw him as a strategic thinker because he was the one presenting the work. I remained categorized as a skilled analyst, competent but not exceptional. The distinction mattered. Strategic thinkers got command opportunities. Analysts got assigned to support roles. The frustration I felt wasn't about ego. It was about fairness. I was doing the work. I was producing the analysis. I was solving the problems. But the system wasn't recognizing that contribution because Rourke was standing in front of it. Around this time, a new squadron commander took over. Colonel Richard Doyle was a face-forward officer, the kind of leader who valued presentation and political fluency over technical competence. He liked officers who could brief well, who looked sharp in uniform, who knew how to navigate Pentagon politics. Rourke fit that profile perfectly. I didn't. Doyle gave Rourke more visibility and more responsibility. He started inviting him to senior leadership meetings. He assigned him to high-profile planning efforts. He positioned him as a rising star within the command. And Rourke leveraged every bit of that access to build his own career. Meanwhile, I was doing the technical work that made Rourke's visibility possible. I was the one staying late to finish the operational plans. I was the one integrating the intelligence feeds. I was the one catching the errors that would have derailed the missions. But none of that mattered to Doyle. He didn't see the engine. He only saw the hood ornament. The condescension from Rourke intensified. He started making jokes in front of other officers about me being the brain trust, or the one who does the real work. The comments were always framed as compliments, but the subtext was clear. I was useful. I was valuable. But I wasn't important. I stopped engaging with him socially. I kept our interactions strictly professional. I answered his questions. I completed the tasks he assigned. But I stopped volunteering information. I stopped offering insights unless directly asked. I built a boundary, even if I couldn't articulate why at the time. Then I was selected for the Classified Intelligence Fusion course. The notification came through my personal inbox, encrypted and time-sensitive. The program was designed to identify officers with exceptional pattern recognition and data integration skills and train them for covert operational support roles. It was a small cohort, highly selective, and career-defining. The kind of assignment that opened doors into worlds most officers never saw. I accepted immediately. Rourke found out 2 days later. I didn't tell him directly. He saw it in a personnel update that listed my temporary reassignment. He walked into my office that afternoon, closed the door, and stood there for a moment without saying anything. "So you're leaving," he finally said. "Temporary assignment," I replied. "I'll be back in 6 months." "Must be nice," he said. Getting pulled into the high-speed stuff. There was no warmth in his voice. No congratulations. Just resentment thinly disguised as casual observation. "It's an opportunity," I said evenly. "I'm going to take it." He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Just don't forget where you came from." I didn't respond. I just looked at him until he left. That conversation marked a shift. I realized he didn't see me as a colleague or a peer. He saw me as a resource. Someone who existed to make his life easier. And now that I was moving into spaces he couldn't access, he didn't know how to process it. I left for the course 3 weeks later. The training was intense, technical, and unforgiving. We worked with classified platforms, advanced reconnaissance systems, and operational scenarios that required absolute precision. I excelled. The instructors noticed. My pattern recognition skills, the ones that had always set me apart, became the foundation for a new operational identity. That's when I was assigned my call sign, Cipher 0. It wasn't ceremonial. It was functional. A classified identifier used in highly compartmentalized operations. Most officers never earned a call sign like that. It meant I'd crossed into a different tier of operational trust. When I returned to my home station 6 months later, I was still a captain. But I wasn't the same officer who'd left. I'd seen what real operational precision looked like. I'd worked with people who valued competence over politics. I'd built skills that mattered in environments where mistakes had consequences. Rourke was still a major. Still politically connected. Still well-regarded by Colonel Doyle. But something had shifted in the way other officers looked at me. I wasn't just the analyst anymore. I was someone with access. Someone with clearances. Someone who'd been selected for things most people didn't even know existed. Rourke noticed. He started asking me questions about the program, fishing for details I couldn't share. I kept my answers vague and professional. He didn't like that. He wanted access to my world, but he couldn't have it. The clearances didn't work that way. The disrespect didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. He started undermining me in small ways. Dismissing my input in planning meetings. Reassigning tasks I'd started to other officers. Making comments that framed me as disconnected from real operations because I'd been working in classified spaces. I stopped caring. I had clarity now. I understood exactly who he was and what he valued. And I knew I didn't need his approval anymore. I just didn't know yet how publicly that clarity would be tested. The crisis started at 0400 hours on a Tuesday. I was stationed temporarily at a conventional command center, assigned there as part of a joint readiness exercise designed to integrate Black Ops support capabilities with traditional air operations. The assignment was supposed to be routine. A few weeks of cross-training, coordination drills, and scenario planning. Nothing high stakes. Nothing urgent. Then the alert came through. A reconnaissance asset had gone dark over contested airspace. Communication was lost. Tracking data was intermittent. The aircraft was carrying sensitive intelligence equipment, and there was a narrow window to either recover it or ensure it didn't fall into hostile hands. The situation required immediate operational planning and a pilot with specific clearances and experience in covert recovery protocols. The operations floor went from quiet to chaotic in under 10 minutes. Officers were pulled from their quarters. Screens lit up with real-time data feeds. Senior leadership started issuing directives, and the entire command center shifted into crisis mode. I was already dressed and on the floor when most officers were still pulling on their uniforms. I'd learned a long time ago to sleep in a state of readiness. I reviewed the initial intelligence brief, scanned the operational parameters, and started running scenarios in my head. The mission profile was complex. High risk. Time-sensitive. Exactly the kind of operation I'd been training for. Major Daniel Rourke was the acting flight commander. Colonel Doyle was off-site, which meant Rourke was the senior officer managing the immediate response. He stood at the center of the operations floor, surrounded by junior officers and enlisted personnel, barking orders and demanding updates. He looked calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He was good at projecting control, but this wasn't a drill. This was real, and the stakes were high. I stayed at my workstation, monitoring the data feeds and waiting for my clearance to be activated. I knew what was coming. This kind of mission required someone with Omega-level clearance and Black Ops flight experience. There weren't many officers in the building who fit that profile. I was one of maybe 3 people who could take the mission, and I was the only one currently on the operations floor. Rourke's voice cut through the noise. I need a Black Ops pilot with Omega-level clearance now. I stood up. Rourke barely glanced in my direction. His eyes swept past me, scanning the room for someone else. When he realized no one else was stepping forward, he looked back at me with visible irritation. "Who even are you?" he said, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. "Go fetch me a coffee, sweetheart." A few officers nearby snickered. The comment hung in the air, sharp and dismissive. The room didn't go silent, but the noise level dropped. People were watching. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I just looked at him and kept my voice level. "Call sign," I said clearly. "Cipher 0, sir." The room went quiet. Rourke froze. His expression shifted from irritation to confusion to something closer to shock. He didn't know my face. We'd been assigned to different commands for the past year, and I'd been operating in classified spaces he didn't have access to. But he knew the call sign. Everyone in that room with the right clearances knew the call sign. Cipher 0 wasn't just an identifier. It was a marker. It meant covert operations. It meant specialized training. It meant someone trusted with missions most officers would never hear about. Rourke's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, trying to reconcile the junior officer he dismissed with the operational identity I'd just revealed. One of the senior NCOs, Technical Sergeant Luis Moreno, spoke up from his station. "Sir, Captain Lane is cleared and current on the recovery protocols. She's your pilot." Rourke still didn't move. His face had gone pale. He looked at me, then at Moreno, then back at me. He started, then stopped. I didn't wait for him to finish. I walked past him toward the briefing room where the mission parameters were being finalized. I didn't look back. I didn't acknowledge the stares or the whispers. I just moved forward, the way I'd been trained to do. Behind me, I heard someone mutter, "That's Cipher 0?" Another voice, quieter, "Has been for over a year." I entered the briefing room and closed the door. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. I felt nothing except clarity. The humiliation Rourke had tried to deliver hadn't landed. It couldn't. Because I knew exactly who I was, and I knew exactly what I was capable of. He'd just found out the hard way. The mission brief took 20 minutes. The scenario was worse than I'd initially understood. The reconnaissance asset wasn't just dark. It had deviated from its flight path and was now in danger of crossing into hostile airspace, where recovery would be impossible. The window to intercept was less than 90 minutes. The weather was deteriorating. The margin for error was 0. I absorbed the details without interruption. I asked 3 questions, all technical. I confirmed my clearance codes and reviewed the encrypted communication protocols. Then I headed to the flight line. Rourke didn't follow me. He stayed in the operations center, managing the coordination from the ground. I was fine with that. I didn't need him in my ear. I didn't need his supervision. I just needed the mission parameters and the authority to execute. The aircraft was prepped and waiting. I ran through the pre-flight checks with methodical precision, the same way I'd done 1,000 times before. The ground crew worked fast and clean. They didn't ask questions. They knew the urgency. I climbed into the cockpit, secured the harness, and initiated the startup sequence. The engines roared to life. The instrument panel lit up. I ran through the final checks, received clearance from the tower, and taxied toward the runway. The takeoff was smooth. The aircraft responded exactly the way it was supposed to. I climbed to altitude and locked onto the last known coordinates of the reconnaissance asset. The data was fragmented, but I'd worked with worse. I adjusted the flight path based on environmental variables and probable drift patterns, then opened the encrypted comm channel. Cipher 0, airborne and en route. ETA to intercept zone, 40 minutes. The voice that came back wasn't Rourke's. It was Lieutenant Colonel Elena Ward, my program handler from the classified side. She'd been pulled into the operation once my call sign activated. Copy, Cipher 0. Weather's degrading faster than predicted. You've got a narrow window. Stay sharp. Understood, I replied. I flew in silence after that, focused entirely on the mission. The sky was dark, the visibility poor, and the turbulence moderate. I adjusted my altitude and speed, staying within the parameters that would give me the best chance of intercepting the asset before it crossed into restricted airspace. 53 minutes later, I had visual contact. The reconnaissance aircraft was still airborne, but barely. It was flying erratically, losing altitude slowly. The automated systems were damaged, and the flight profile suggested it was running on minimal power. I maneuvered into position, established a secure data link, and began transmitting the override codes. It took 4 attempts. The system was degraded, and the handshake protocols kept failing. But I stayed patient. I adjusted the transmission frequency, recalibrated the signal strength, and tried again. The 5th attempt worked. The reconnaissance aircraft systems accepted the override, and I gained control. I stabilized the flight path, corrected the altitude, and guided it back toward friendly airspace. Cipher 0 to control. Asset is secure and under tow. Art B in 90 minutes. Ward's voice came back immediately. Outstanding work, Cipher 0. Bring it home. The flight back was uneventful. I landed both aircraft safely, debriefed with the intelligence team, and filed the mission report. The whole operation, from alert to recovery, had taken just under 4 hours. By the time I returned to the operations center, the crisis was over. The room had returned to its normal rhythm. Officers were back at their stations, reviewing data and processing after-action reports. Rourke was still there. He was standing near the central display, talking with another officer. When I walked in, he looked up. Our eyes met for a brief second. He looked away first. I didn't stop. I walked past him to my workstation, logged the final entries into the mission database, and shut down my terminal. As I was leaving, Lieutenant Colonel Ward appeared at my side. A word, Captain? I followed her into a small briefing room off the main floor. She closed the door and leaned against the table, arms crossed. You handled that well, she said. The mission? I asked. The mission. And the rest of it. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't sure what she wanted me to say. Ward continued. I heard what happened before you launched. What Rourke said. It doesn't matter, I said. It does, Ward replied. But not in the way you think. You didn't escalate. You didn't defend yourself. You just stated your call sign and moved forward. That's exactly the right response. I didn't have time for anything else, I said. Ward smiled slightly. You don't correct a man like that, Captain. You rise beyond him. I looked at her, processing the statement. You already have, she added. He just didn't know it until today. She handed me a folder. New assignment. You're being moved to a primary integration role. Effective immediately. This is no longer temporary. I opened the folder and scanned the orders. It was a permanent reassignment to the Black Ops support structure. A promotion recommendation was attached. My next evaluation cycle would almost certainly move me to major ahead of schedule. You've earned this, Ward said. Don't second-guess it. I won't, I said. She nodded and left the room. I stood there for a moment, holding the folder, feeling the weight of what had just shifted. I'd spent years building toward this. Years of long hours, unrecognized work, and quiet competence. And now, finally, the system had caught up. I thought about Rourke. About the years I'd spent supporting him. About the credit he'd taken and the disrespect he'd shown. About the moment on the operations floor when he dismissed me in front of everyone. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel vindication. I just felt clear. I'd stopped investing in people who didn't see me. And that decision had set me free. Senior leadership didn't reprimand me. They didn't question my response. They didn't ask me to smooth things over or apologize for the public nature of what had happened. Instead, they pulled me aside to verify clearance protocols and ensure operational security hadn't been compromised. The tone was respectful. The questions were procedural. No one suggested I'd done anything wrong. Rourke sent me an apology the next day. It came through official channels, brief and formulaic. He blamed operational stress, acknowledged the comment was inappropriate, and expressed regret for any misunderstanding. The language was careful, designed to satisfy documentation requirements without admitting real fault. I read it once, then deleted it. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. 2 days later, I sat down with Lieutenant Colonel Elena Ward in a secure briefing room reserved for classified program discussions. She was my handler, the officer who managed my integration into Black Ops support roles. She was in her early 40s, sharp and completely uninterested in office politics. She evaluated people based on performance, not personality, and she had a reputation for protecting the officers under her command. Tell me what happened, she said, even though I knew she'd already read the incident reports. I gave her the short version. The alert. The mission requirement. Rourke's dismissal. My response. The successful recovery. Ward listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me for a moment. You handled it correctly, she said. But I need you to understand something. Men like Rourke don't change because they're embarrassed. They change because they're forced to. I'm not trying to force anything, I said. I know, Ward replied. But you need to be prepared for what comes next. He's going to try to recover his credibility. He's going to rewrite the narrative. And some people will believe him because it's easier than admitting they missed who you actually are. I nodded. I'd already considered that possibility. The best thing you can do, Ward continued, is rise beyond him. Don't engage. Don't correct the record. Just keep doing the work. Let your performance speak. That's what I've been doing, I said. I know, Ward said. That's why you're here. She slid a folder across the table. New operational assignments. You're being moved into primary integration roles. No more temporary attachments. You're fully embedded now. I opened the folder and scanned the details. The assignments were significant. High-clearance missions. Direct coordination with intelligence assets. The kind of work that defined careers. There's also a promotion recommendation attached, Ward added. You're being fast-tracked to major. The board meets in 6 months. If your evaluations stay clean, you'll pin on ahead of schedule. I looked up at her. That's unusual. You're unusual, Ward said. Most officers don't have your skill set. And most officers don't handle pressure the way you do. The program needs people like you. So does the Air Force. I closed the folder and met her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me, Ward said. You earned this. I'm just making sure the system recognizes it. She stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. As I reached the door, she spoke again. One more thing, Captain. You don't owe Rourke anything. Not an explanation. Not forgiveness. Not your labor. You gave him years of work he didn't deserve. Don't give him another minute of your time. I nodded and left. Over the next several weeks, I settled into my new role. The work was demanding, but it was the kind of demanding I thrived in. Every mission required precision. Every decision had consequences. There was no room for politics or posturing. You either delivered or you didn't. I started noticing changes in how other officers treated me. The ones with high clearances nodded when they passed me in the hallways. Senior NCOs sought me out for technical consultations. Colonel-level officers who'd never acknowledged me before started including me in strategic planning sessions. I also noticed changes in how people treated Rourke. Without me covering for him, his weaknesses became visible. Planning briefs he used to deliver with confidence now had gaps. Analysis he used to present as comprehensive was revealed as surface level. Decisions he used to make quickly were now delayed or deferred to others. He wasn't incompetent. But he wasn't exceptional either. And in an environment that demanded excellence, not incompetent, wasn't enough. His evaluation reports began reflecting the decline. Comments that used to praise his strategic thinking became more measured, more qualified. Opportunities that used to come automatically started passing him by. His promotion trajectory, once assured, began to flatten. I didn't cause any of this. I didn't sabotage him or undermine him. I simply stopped doing his work. I stopped filling in the gaps. I stopped making him look better than he was. The system did the rest. I ran into him occasionally in common spaces. Meetings. Briefings. Joint planning sessions. He was always polite, always professional. He never referenced the incident on the operations floor. He never acknowledged what had changed between us. I treated him the same way. Polite. Professional. Distant. One afternoon, about 2 months after the incident, I was reviewing mission parameters in a planning cell when Rourke walked in. He needed access to a shared database for an upcoming briefing. I was the only one in the room with the appropriate clearance codes. Captain Lane, he said, his tone carefully neutral. I need access to the Intel database. Can you unlock it? I looked up from my screen. What's your clearance level? Delta 6, he said. This database requires Omega 3 or higher, I replied. I can't grant access. He hesitated. Can you pull the files I need? What files? I asked. He described the operational summaries he was looking for. They were standard briefing materials, nothing classified beyond his level. I pulled the files, transferred them to a shared drive he could access, and returned to my work. Thank you, he said. I nodded without looking up. He stood there for a moment longer, as if he wanted to say something else. Then he left. That interaction summarized our new dynamic. I helped when the mission required it. I didn't help when it was about making his life easier. The distinction mattered. Around this time, I started mentoring a junior officer named Captain Jenna Price. She was a pilot with strong technical skills, but limited confidence in command environments. She reminded me of myself a few years earlier, competent but unsure how to navigate the political landscape. I didn't give her career advice. I didn't tell her how to network or manage perceptions. I just modeled what I wish someone had shown me. Do the work, set boundaries, and don't invest in people who don't respect your contributions. She absorbed it quickly. Within 6 months, she was getting assigned to higher profile missions. Her evaluations improved. Her confidence grew. One day, she asked me, "How do you know when to stop helping someone?" I thought about the question for a moment. When they start treating your help as an expectation instead of a gift. She nodded slowly, processing the answer. Some people will take everything you give them and still act like you're not doing enough, I continued. Those aren't the people you build a career around. What do you do instead? She asked. You find the people who value what you bring. And you invest there. Jenna smiled. That makes sense. I didn't mention Rourke by name. I didn't need to. The lesson was universal. By the time my 6-month evaluation cycle arrived, my record was flawless. Every mission successful. Every brief delivered on time. Every coordination effort executed without error. The promotion board reviewed my file and recommended me for early advancement to major. I pinned on at 33, the same rank Rourke held. But the context was different. He'd reached major on schedule through steady, unremarkable performance. I'd reached it ahead of schedule through demonstrated excellence in high-stakes environments. The difference mattered. The day I pinned on, Ward sent me a message, "Well done, Major. You've earned every bit of this." I didn't celebrate. I just kept working. Because the work was the point. It always had been. My promotion to Major changed nothing about how I worked, but it changed everything about how others saw me. The rank itself carried authority. People listened when I spoke. My recommendations carried weight in planning sessions. Junior officers sought my guidance. Senior officers included me in strategic discussions that used to happen above my level. But more than the rank, it was the context that mattered. I'd earned the promotion through Black Ops performance in classified environments. That background gave me credibility in circles where credibility was hard-won and easily lost. Rourke noticed. We were both majors now, technically equivalent in pay grade. But the trajectories were diverging. I was being assigned to high-clearance integration roles. He was managing routine operations and conventional commands. I was working with senior intelligence officers on time-sensitive missions. He was coordinating training exercises and administrative functions. The gap wasn't dramatic. It wasn't public. But it was real, and it was widening. I saw him during a joint planning session about 4 months after my promotion. The session brought together officers from multiple commands to coordinate a large-scale readiness exercise. I was there to represent Black Ops support capabilities. He was there as a flight commander managing one of the conventional squadrons. The meeting was led by a colonel I didn't know well. He opened with an overview of the exercise parameters, then turned to the group for input on operational priorities. Several officers spoke. Some offered logistical concerns. Others raised questions about resource allocation. When the colonel asked about intelligence integration, he looked directly at me. Major Lane, what do we need to consider from your side? I outlined the coordination requirements, the clearance levels involved, and the operational constraints that would affect how we could integrate classified assets. I kept it brief and technical. The room listened without interruption. When I finished, the colonel nodded. That's clear. We'll build those parameters into the planning timeline. He moved on to the next topic. I sat back and resumed taking notes. Later in the meeting, the colonel asked Rourke about squadron readiness. Rourke gave a competent summary of training status and aircraft availability. It was solid, professional, and exactly what was expected. But it wasn't exceptional. It was routine. After the meeting, several officers approached me with follow-up questions about integration protocols. They treated me as the subject matter expert. They deferred to my judgment. They asked for my recommendations. Rourke left without speaking to anyone. I didn't take satisfaction in the shift. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about the work, and the work was moving forward. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice the change. For years, officers had deferred to him. They'd sought his approval. They'd treated him as the authoritative voice in the room. Now, in meetings where we were both present, that deference was shifting. Not dramatically. Not universally. But unmistakably. I ran into Technical Sergeant Luis Moreno in the hallway after the meeting. He'd been present during the operations floor incident months earlier, and he'd been one of the NCOs who'd quietly supported me ever since. "Good brief in there, Major," he said. "Thanks, Sergeant," I replied. He hesitated, then added, "You know, it's strange. I've been watching how people react to you and Major Rourke in the same room. It's like they forgot he used to be the one everyone looked to." I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't sure what to say. Moreno continued. "I think they just realized who was actually doing the work all along." "Maybe," I said. "No maybe about it," Moreno said. "Some of us knew. We just didn't have the rank to say it out loud." I appreciated the honesty. I never needed people to say it out loud. I just needed them to stop pretending I was invisible. Moreno nodded. "Well, no one's pretending anymore." He walked off, and I stood there for a moment, processing the conversation. The truth was, I didn't want Rourke to fail. I didn't want him to be humiliated or pushed out of the Air Force. I just wanted him to stop taking credit for work he didn't do. I wanted him to stop treating competent people like support infrastructure. And I wanted the system to recognize the difference between performance and perception. That recognition was happening now, slowly but steadily. Around this time, I received an assignment to lead a classified test flight supporting a new reconnaissance platform. The mission required integrating multiple intelligence streams in real time while operating in denied airspace. It was high risk, technically complex, and career-defining. I spent 3 weeks preparing. I reviewed every technical specification. I ran simulations until I could execute the mission profile in my sleep. I coordinated with intelligence analysts, mission planners, and support personnel across multiple commands. The flight itself went flawlessly. I completed the mission objectives, gathered the required data, and returned without incident. The after-action report noted exceptional performance and recommended me for future assignments in the same operational space. My call sign, Cipher 0, began circulating more widely among officers with high clearances. It wasn't a name people used casually. It was a marker. A signal that I'd crossed into a tier of operational trust that most officers never reached. I didn't advertise it. I didn't mention it in casual conversation. But people knew. And that knowledge changed how they interacted with me. A few weeks after the test flight, I was invited to a small briefing with senior leadership. The meeting included 2 colonels and a brigadier general I'd never worked with directly. They wanted my assessment of integration challenges for an upcoming operational deployment. I gave them an honest evaluation. I outlined the technical constraints, the coordination risks, and the clearance issues that would need to be resolved. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I didn't tell them what I thought they wanted to hear. I just gave them the facts. When I finished, the brigadier general looked at me and said, "This is exactly the kind of analysis we need. Clear, grounded, and actionable." "Thank you, Major." I nodded. "Happy to help, sir." As I left the briefing, one of the colonels walked with me. "You've built a strong reputation in a short time," he said. "I've been doing this work for a while," I replied. "People are just starting to notice." He smiled. "That's one way to put it." We reached the hallway and he stopped. "One piece of advice, if you're open to it." "Always," I said. "Don't let anyone pull you back into work that doesn't match your skill set. You've earned the right to be selective. Use it." I understood what he was saying. Officers at my level often got pulled into administrative roles or support functions that didn't leverage their strengths. It was easy to say yes to everything, to stay accommodating, to keep helping people who didn't value the help. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. "Good," he replied. "The Air Force needs people like you in the right roles. Don't let anyone waste your time." He walked off, and I stood there for a moment, absorbing the advice. It was permission to set boundaries. Permission to prioritize. Permission to stop carrying people who didn't deserve it. I'd already started doing that with Rourke. But hearing it from senior leadership made it feel less like selfishness and more like strategic career management. I thought about the years I'd spent supporting him. The late nights. The uncredited work. The quiet fixes that kept his career moving forward. I didn't regret the work itself. I'd learned from it. I'd built skills that served me now. But I regretted the imbalance. The one-sided investment. The failure to recognize that not everyone deserves your best effort. Some people only respect rank. Others respect work. I'd stopped investing in the first kind. And that decision had set everything else in motion. I stopped fixing Daniel Rourke's problems. It wasn't a dramatic decision. I didn't announce it. I didn't confront him. I just stopped volunteering my time, my analysis, and my labor to make his work easier. When he asked for help, I evaluated the request the same way I'd evaluate any professional request. Does this serve the mission? Is this within my responsibility? Is this a reasonable use of my time? Most of the time, the answer was no. The first time I declined, he looked surprised. We were in a shared planning space, and he'd asked me to review a brief he was preparing for a senior leadership meeting. It was the kind of task I used to do automatically, without being asked. I don't have capacity right now, I said evenly. You might want to check with Captain Ellis. He has more availability this week. Rourke hesitated. It'll only take you 20 minutes. It'll take someone 20 minutes, I replied. But I'm committed to other priorities. He stared at me for a moment, trying to determine if I was serious. I held his gaze, my expression neutral. All right, he said finally. I'll figure it out. I returned to my work. He left without another word. Over the next few weeks, he made similar requests. Each time, I declined politely and professionally. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I just redirected him to other resources or told him I wasn't available. He started to realize I wasn't going to resume the pattern we'd established years earlier. One afternoon, he approached me in the hallway outside the operations center. His tone was casual, but I could hear the edge underneath. I thought we were a team, he said. I stopped walking and turned to face him. We were. You changed the terms. What does that mean? He asked. It means I supported you for years, I said calmly. You took that support without acknowledgement, without reciprocity, without respect. I'm not interested in continuing that arrangement. His jaw tightened. So this is about the coffee comment. This is about years of unreciprocated labor, I replied. The coffee comment just made it impossible to ignore. He looked at me like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just shook his head and walked away. I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear. Around this time, subtle rumors started circulating. Officers who were friendly with Rourke began describing me as uncooperative or difficult to work with. The comments were quiet, informal, designed to shift perceptions without creating a formal conflict. I didn't respond to the rumors. I didn't defend myself. I just kept doing my work at the same high standard I'd always maintained. Captain Jenna Price mentioned the rumors to me one day. People are saying you're not a team player anymore. People who say that usually mean I'm not playing for their team, I replied. She smiled. That's a good line. It's also true, I said. Some officers expect support without offering anything in return. When you stop providing that support, they reframe it as a character flaw. So what do? She asked. You let your work speak, I said. If your performance is solid, the rumors don't matter. Jenna nodded. That makes sense. It did make sense. But it required patience. Rumors moved faster than performance records, and some officers would believe the narrative that was easiest to accept. I focused on what I could control: mission execution, operational precision, and professional integrity. My assignments continued to grow in scope and complexity. I was selected to lead integration efforts for multiple high-clearance operations. My recommendations were incorporated into strategic planning documents. Senior officers sought my input on technical challenges that fell outside conventional expertise. My performance evaluations reflected the shift. Comments praised my initiative, my technical acumen, and my ability to deliver under pressure. There were no mentions of being uncooperative or difficult. The formal record told a different story than the hallway gossip. During this period, I received an early recommendation for promotion to lieutenant colonel. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was significant. Most officers didn't receive recommendations that early. It signaled that senior leadership saw me as someone worth investing in. Meanwhile, Rourke's career plateaued. His evaluation reports were adequate but unremarkable. He wasn't failing. He wasn't making critical errors. But he wasn't excelling either. He was performing at the level expected of a major, but not beyond it. Without my support, the gaps in his work became visible. Planning documents he produced lacked depth. Briefs he delivered were competent, but not insightful. Decisions he made were safe, but not innovative. He wasn't incompetent. He just wasn't exceptional. And in a competitive promotion environment, not exceptional meant stagnation. Opportunities that used to come to him automatically started going to other officers. Assignments he expected to receive were given to people with stronger operational records. His name stopped appearing on leadership's shortlists for high-visibility roles. I watched this happen without satisfaction or sympathy. It wasn't my responsibility to manage his career. It never had been. I'd just mistaken support for obligation, and I'd paid for that mistake with years of unrecognized labor. One day, I was in a joint planning session when the senior officer leading the meeting turned to Rourke and asked for his assessment of a logistical challenge. Rourke gave a surface-level answer that didn't address the core issue. The senior officer frowned, then turned to me. "Major Lane, do you have thoughts on this?" I outlined the underlying coordination problem, identified the constraints that were driving the issue, and proposed a solution that would resolve it without requiring additional resources. The senior officer nodded. "That's exactly what we needed. Let's move forward with that approach." Rourke said nothing. He just sat there, his expression carefully neutral. After the meeting, several officers approached me with follow-up questions. They treated me as the authoritative voice on the topic. Rourke left without speaking to anyone. It wasn't the first time that dynamic had played out, and it wouldn't be the last. The shift in how people treated us wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single moment. It was an accumulation of small interactions where competence and credibility were tested and weighed. I delivered consistently. He didn't. The system noticed. Around this time, command started pressuring me to smooth things over with Rourke for the sake of unit cohesion. The suggestion came from a lieutenant colonel who supervised both of us in overlapping operational spaces. "There's tension between you and Major Rourke," he said during a private meeting. "It's affecting the team dynamic." "I'm not aware of any tension," I replied. "We interact professionally when required." "You used to work together closely," he said. "Now you barely speak." "People notice." "We interact as much as the mission requires," I said. "Nothing more. Nothing less." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "It would be easier if you could find a way to work together the way you used to." "Easier for whom?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "For everyone." "I don't agree," I said. "The current arrangement works fine. I fulfill my responsibilities. He fulfills his. There's no operational impact." "There's a perception impact," he replied. "Perceptions aren't my responsibility," I said evenly. "Performance is. If my performance is inadequate, I'm happy to discuss it. But if this is about managing someone else's comfort, I'm not interested." The lieutenant colonel looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." He didn't bring it up again. I knew the conversation would get back to Rourke. I knew some officers would interpret my refusal as confirmation that I was difficult. But I also knew that bending to pressure would reset the pattern I'd worked so hard to break. I wasn't going to do that. Some boundaries are worth defending, even when they're uncomfortable. Especially when they're uncomfortable. Without me compensating for his weaknesses, Daniel Rourke's performance flaws became undeniable. It started with small things. A planning brief that lacked critical details. A coordination meeting where he couldn't answer straightforward questions. A timeline he'd built that didn't account for obvious constraints. None of it was catastrophic, but all of it was visible. Senior officers began asking follow-up questions he couldn't answer. Enlisted personnel started double-checking his directives before executing them. Other majors stopped deferring to him in joint planning sessions. His evaluation reports reflected the decline. Comments that used to praise his strategic thinking became more qualified. Adequate performance under routine conditions. Meets expectations for current role. Would benefit from additional technical development. The language was careful, but the message was clear. He was no longer on a fast-track promotion path. Meanwhile, my operational record continued to strengthen. I completed a high-risk covert test flight that involved integrating real-time intelligence feeds while operating in contested airspace. The mission required split-second decision-making and absolute precision. I executed it flawlessly. The after-action report described my performance as exceptional and recommended me for future assignments in the same operational space. My call sign, Cypher 0, became quietly respected among officers with high clearance access. It wasn't something people discussed openly, but it carried weight in the circles that mattered. I was promoted to Major at 33, matching Rourke's rank. But the context was different. He'd reached Major on schedule through steady, unremarkable performance. I'd reached it ahead of schedule through demonstrated excellence in high-stakes environments. The distinction mattered. During a multi-day joint planning exercise, I saw the full scope of how things had shifted. The exercise brought together officers from across multiple commands to coordinate a simulated large-scale operation. Rourke and I were both assigned to the planning cell, working parallel but independent tasks. On the second day, the senior officer overseeing the exercise, a colonel named Marcus Hale, called for input on a critical coordination challenge. Several officers offered suggestions. None of them addressed the core issue. Colonel Hale looked around the room. His eyes landed on me. "Major Lane, you've been quiet. What's your read?" I walked through the problem, identified the constraints, and proposed a solution that integrated multiple operational requirements without creating new vulnerabilities. Colonel Hale nodded. "That works. Let's build the timeline around that framework." Other officers in the room began asking me clarifying questions. They deferred to my judgment. They treated me as the subject matter expert. Rourke sat at the far end of the table, silent. Later that day, during a break, I overheard a conversation between two captains I didn't know well. "Who's the lead on integration?" one asked. "Lane," the other replied. "She's the one with the Omega clearances." "The one they call Cypher 0? "Yeah. She doesn't talk about it, but everyone knows." I didn't react. I just kept walking. That evening, I was reviewing mission parameters in a shared workspace when Rourke approached. He stood near my workstation for a moment, not saying anything. I looked up. "Do you need something, Major?" He hesitated. I wanted to say I appreciate the work you're doing on this exercise. "Thank you," I said. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I know things have changed between us." I didn't respond. I just waited. "I'm not sure how to fix it," he said. "You can't," I replied. "Some things aren't fixable. They're just lessons." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "So that's it?" "That's it," I said. "We work together when the mission requires it. We stay professional. That's enough." "It didn't used to be," he said. "It used to be unbalanced," I replied. "Now it's fair." He stood there for another moment, then nodded slowly and walked away. I returned to my work. The conversation hadn't been satisfying, but it had been honest. And honesty was better than pretending we could return to something that had never been equitable in the first place. As the exercise continued, the pattern repeated. Officers deferred to me in planning sessions. Senior leadership sought my input on technical challenges. My recommendations were incorporated into the operational framework. Rourke's contributions were adequate but unremarkable. He wasn't failing, but he wasn't leading either. On the final day of the exercise, Colonel Hale pulled me aside. "You performed exceptionally well this week, Major. I'm recommending you for a follow-on assignment that'll leverage your skill set more directly." "Thank you, sir," I said. "I'm also putting you forward for early consideration for Lieutenant Colonel," he added. "You've earned it." I nodded. "I appreciate that." He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You know, I've worked with a lot of officers over the years. The best ones are the ones who don't need recognition to keep performing. You're one of those." "I just focus on the work, sir," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's why you're succeeding." After the exercise concluded, I returned to my primary assignment. The rhythm of my work resumed: classified missions, high-clearance coordination, and operational precision that left no room for error. I heard Rourke's name occasionally. He'd been reassigned to a staff role that involved routine coordination and administrative oversight. It wasn't a bad assignment, but it wasn't a stepping stone to anything significant. His career had stabilized at a level that was respectable but unexceptional. I felt no satisfaction in that outcome. I felt no vindication. I just felt clear. Justice hadn't come through retaliation or revenge. It had come through exposure. Without me covering for him, the system had evaluated him accurately. And the evaluation reflected his actual capability, not the inflated version I'd been propping up for years. I'd stopped investing my labor in someone who didn't value it. And that decision had freed me to invest in work that mattered. The lesson wasn't about Rourke. It was about boundaries. Some people will take everything you give them and still treat you as invisible. The solution isn't to give more. It's to stop giving to them entirely. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. But I'd learned it completely. And I wasn't going to forget it. Daniel Rourke tried to apologize. It happened 6 months after the joint planning exercise, during a routine coordination meeting at a shared command facility. I was there to brief senior leadership on integration protocols for an upcoming operation. Rourke was there representing his squadron on logistical matters. The meeting ended, and as officers filed out of the conference room, Rourke approached me in the hallway. "Major Lane," he said. "Do you have a minute?" I stopped walking. "What do you need?" He glanced around, as if checking whether anyone was listening. I wanted to talk. Privately. I considered declining, but curiosity won. All right. We stepped into an empty briefing room. Rourke closed the door and stood there for a moment, searching for words. "I've been thinking a lot about how things went between us," he said finally. "I handled it poorly." I didn't respond. I just waited. "You carried me professionally for years," he continued. "I took that for granted. I treated your work like it was expected instead of recognizing what you were actually doing." "Yes," I said. "You did." He winced slightly at the directness. "I'm sorry. I should have acknowledged your contributions. I should have supported you the way you supported me." "You should have," I agreed. "But you didn't." "I know," he said. "And I can't undo that. But I want you to know I recognize it now." I studied him for a moment. The apology seemed genuine. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who'd spent months working up the courage to say something difficult. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "But it doesn't change anything." "I'm not asking to go back to how things were," he said quickly. "I know that's not possible. I just wanted you to know I understand what I did wrong." "All right," I said. "I hear you." He nodded, relieved that I wasn't angry. "Is there any way we can work together professionally? Without all the tension?" "We already do," I replied. "We interact when the mission requires it. We stay professional. That's sufficient." "But it's not the same," he said. "No," I agreed. "It's not. It's better." He frowned. "Better how?" "It's balanced," I said. "You don't take my labor for granted. I don't resent you for taking it. We both do our jobs, and that's enough." He looked at me like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just stood there, processing what I'd said. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I do respect you. I should have shown that years ago." "You're right," I said. "You should have." I left the room without waiting for a response. The apology was genuine, but it didn't repair the relationship. Some things can't be repaired. They can only be learned from. Rourke and I continued to interact professionally over the following months. We attended the same meetings occasionally. We coordinated on joint projects when required. But the dynamic stayed bounded. I helped when the mission required it. I didn't help when it was about making his life easier. The distinction was clear, and he stopped asking for more than that. Other officers noticed the limited reconciliation. A few of them seemed relieved, as if they'd been uncomfortable with the visible tension. But most didn't care. They were focused on their own work, their own careers, their own challenges. I was fine with that. I wasn't interested in managing other people's perceptions. I was interested in doing work that mattered. Around this time, I started mentoring more junior officers intentionally. Captain Jenna Price was the first, but others followed. Young women who were technically competent but unsure how to navigate environments where competence alone wasn't enough. I didn't give them generic career advice. I gave them specific tools: how to set boundaries, how to recognize when someone was using their labor without reciprocity, how to invest in people who valued their contributions. One of the officers I mentored, a first lieutenant named Sarah Vance, asked me during a coaching session, "How do you know when someone actually respects you versus when they're just using you?" "You watch what they do when you stop helping," I said. "If they treat you worse, they were using you. If they treat you the same, they respected you all along." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's a hard test." "It is," I agreed. "But it's the only one that matters." She applied that lesson a few months later when a senior officer in her squadron kept assigning her work that wasn't in her job description. She declined politely and redirected him to the appropriate personnel. He reacted poorly at first, calling her uncooperative. But she held the boundary. Eventually, he stopped asking, and their professional relationship stabilized. She told me later, "You were right. He didn't respect me. He just wanted someone to do his work." "Now you know," I said. "And you won't make that mistake again." "I won't," she agreed. Watching younger officers apply these lessons gave me more satisfaction than any promotion or recognition ever had. I was building something more valuable than my own career. I was helping create a culture where competence was respected and boundaries were enforced. My career continued to progress. I completed multiple high-clearance missions with flawless execution. I received early promotion to lieutenant colonel at 38. My operational reputation grew within the circles that mattered. Rourke's career stabilized at major. He wasn't pushed out. He wasn't punished. He just stopped advancing. His evaluation reports remained adequate but unremarkable. He stayed in staff roles that required coordination but not leadership. I saw him occasionally at joint command functions. We spoke briefly when necessary, always professionally. There was no animosity. There was no warmth either. Just mutual acknowledgement that we'd both moved on. One day, about 2 years after his apology, I ran into him in the corridor outside a senior leadership briefing. We were both waiting to be called in for separate presentations. "Major Lane," he said. It took me a moment to realize he'd used my old rank. "It's lieutenant colonel now," I said mildly. "Right," he said. "Sorry." "Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, "You were right, you know." "About what?" I asked. "About boundaries," he said. "About not giving your best work to people who don't value it." I looked at him, surprised he was bringing it up. "I've been thinking about how I treated you," he continued. "And how I treated other junior officers. I took advantage of people who were trying to help. I didn't mean to, but that's what I did." "That's honest," I said. "I'm trying to do better now," he said. "I'm trying to recognize when someone's going above and beyond instead of just expecting it." "That's good," I said. He nodded. "I know we're not going to be close. I know I burned that bridge. But I wanted you to know I learned something from how things ended between us." "I'm glad," I said. And I meant it. His name was called, and he headed into the briefing room. I stayed in the corridor, thinking about the conversation. He'd learned something. Maybe not everything. Maybe not enough to fully repair the damage. But something. That was more than I'd expected. It wasn't redemption. But it was growth. And that was enough. 5 years after the operations floor incident, I was a seasoned lieutenant colonel with a career defined by precision, competence, and quiet authority. I worked primarily in elite Black Ops integration roles, coordinating missions that most officers would never hear about. The work was demanding, high stakes, and exactly what I'd been training for since I first watched those A-10s launch at dusk as a child. My call sign, Cypher 0, remained classified but respected within the circles that mattered. It wasn't something I advertised. It was just part of who I was professionally. I mentored younger officers regularly now. Women, mostly, who reminded me of myself at earlier stages. Technically skilled, hardworking, and unsure how to navigate environments where competence alone wasn't enough. I gave them the tools I developed through years of trial and error: set boundaries, recognize patterns of exploitation, invest in people who value your work, and never apologize for refusing to carry someone who treats your labor as an entitlement. The lessons weren't revolutionary. They were just practical. And they worked. Captain Sarah Vance, one of my early ments, was promoted to major ahead of schedule. She sent me a message: "Thank you for teaching me to protect my time. I wouldn't be here without that." I replied, "You would have figured it out. I just helped you get there faster." Another officer, First Lieutenant Maya Chin, told me during a coaching session, "You changed how I think about work. I used to think being helpful meant saying yes to everything. Now I know being helpful means being strategic about where I invest my effort." "Exactly," I said. "Your time and skill are finite resources. Use them wisely." These conversations gave me more satisfaction than any medal or commendation. I was building something that would outlast my career, a generation of officers who understood that respect was earned through boundaries, not compliance. During this period, I heard Daniel Rourke's name occasionally. He was still a major, still working in staff coordination roles. His career had plateaued years ago, but he hadn't been forced out. He was competent enough to stay employed, just not exceptional enough to advance. I felt no satisfaction in that outcome. I felt no bitterness either. I just felt neutral. His career was his responsibility, not mine. I'd stopped carrying him years ago, and I'd never looked back. One afternoon, I was reviewing mission parameters in my office when Lieutenant Colonel Elena Ward stopped by. She'd been my program handler for years, and she'd become something close to a friend within the constraints of military professionalism. "How are you doing, Cypher?" she asked, using my call sign the way she always did in private conversations. "Busy," I said. "But good." "I heard you're being considered for colonel," she said. I looked up surprised. "I haven't seen anything formal." "You will," Ward said. "The board meets in 3 months. Your name's on the short list." I set down the file I'd been reading. "That's earlier than I expected." "You've earned it," Ward said. "Multiple times over." I didn't respond immediately. The prospect of making colonel felt surreal. It was a rank I'd hoped to reach eventually, but I'd assumed it would take another 5 years at minimum. "Don't second-guess it," Ward said, reading my silence correctly. "You've done the work. You've built the reputation. This is just the system catching up." "All right," I said. Ward smiled. "You're allowed to feel proud, you know." "I'll work on that," I said. She laughed and left. That evening, I thought about the trajectory of my career. The years I'd spent supporting Daniel Rourke. The moment on the operations floor when he dismissed me in front of everyone. The decision I'd made to stop investing in people who didn't value my contributions. All of it had led here. Not because I'd sought revenge. Not because I'd destroyed someone else's career. But because I'd withdrawn my labor from a situation that was exploiting it, and I'd redirected that labor toward work that mattered. The victory wasn't the promotion. The victory was the clarity. I'd learned to recognize when someone was using me. I'd learned to set boundaries without guilt. I'd learned to invest in people who valued what I brought instead of people who expected it. Those lessons had changed everything. 3 months later, I was promoted to colonel. The ceremony was small, attended by senior officers who'd worked with me over the years and junior officers I'd mentored. Ward was there. Captain Jenna Price was there. Sarah Vance flew in from her duty station to attend. Daniel Rourke wasn't there. I hadn't invited him, and he hadn't reached out. After the ceremony, Ward pulled me aside. "How does it feel?" "Surreal," I said honestly. "You've come a long way from that operations floor," she said. "I have," I agreed. "Do you ever think about that moment?" she asked. I considered the question. "Sometimes. But not the way you'd think." "What do you mean?" Ward asked. "I used to think that moment was the worst thing that could happen," I said. Being dismissed publicly. Being treated like I didn't matter. But it wasn't the worst thing. It was the clearest thing. It forced me to see a pattern I'd been ignoring for years. Ward nodded. "And now?" "Now I don't carry people who don't respect the work," I said. "I don't give my best effort to people who treat it as an entitlement. And I don't apologize for protecting my time." "That's wisdom," Ward said. "It's survival," I replied. She smiled. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Later that evening, I sat alone in my quarters, thinking about legacy. My legacy wasn't the missions I'd flown. It wasn't the clearances I'd earned or the rank I'd achieved. My legacy was the officers I'd mentored, the boundaries I'd modeled, the culture I'd helped shift, one conversation at a time. I thought about the younger officers who'd come to me over the years, unsure and overwhelmed. I thought about the tools I'd given them, how to recognize exploitation, how to set boundaries, how to invest strategically in relationships that were reciprocal. I thought about the women who'd told me, "You changed how I think about work." That was the legacy that mattered. I'd learned the hard way that some people only respect rank. Others respect work. And the key to a sustainable career was learning to tell the difference. I'd stopped investing in the first kind. And that decision had set everything else in motion. My call sign, Cipher 0, would remain classified. Most people would never know the missions I'd supported or the operations I'd coordinated. That was fine. The work mattered, not the recognition. But the officers I'd mentored would remember the lessons. They'd pass them on to the next generation. They'd build careers on boundaries and reciprocity instead of compliance and exhaustion. That was enough. I thought about Daniel Rourke one last time. About the years I'd spent supporting him. About the moment he'd dismissed me. About the apology he'd eventually offered. I didn't hate him. I didn't forgive him either. I just recognized him for what he was, a lesson. Some people will take everything you give them and still act like you're not doing enough. The solution isn't to give more. It's to stop giving. I'd learned that lesson. I'd applied it. And I'd taught it to others. That was my legacy. Not the missions. Not the rank. Not the recognition. The boundaries. The clarity. The refusal to carry people who didn't value the weight. I closed my eyes and let the thought settle. I'd built a career on precision and competence. But I'd built a life on knowing when to stop. And that made all the difference. And that's how one moment of disrespect reshaped my entire career. I didn't need revenge, I just needed to stop carrying someone who never saw my worth. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? Did you walk away, or did you confront them? What did that turning point look like for you? Drop your story in the comments. And if this hit home for you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Someone out there might need the reminder that respect isn't given, it's earned.